This is a nice little plastic workbench or work table that I got a few years ago. The brand is Keter or Keter. It comes with these two F-style clamps that fit into the tracks, which easily holds things. There's a shelf down here where the clamps can store, and the whole table folds flat and stores easily. It's not very heavy. But the problem is, if you can read the ruler, is that it's only 30 inches tall. So, while it's very convenient, I'm an average height person, so it hits me about mid-thigh, which means I have to bend over quite a bit anytime I want to work on the surface of this table. If you're shorter than average height, the table is probably just fine for you. I looked at several other tables that fold out like this at other big box stores, and they all seem about that same height. But that's one reason I shifted back to the old table that I built several years ago, 10 or 11 years ago. I made it out of 2x4s and some very thin sheets of plywood. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't have a lot of tools, but it is 36 inches tall. So it hits me almost at the waist, which is much more comfortable. Now, I bought these 4-inch casters that I'm going to add to the bottom, which will add 4.5 inches to the top, so it will hit me right at the waist and it'll be very comfortable to work at that height. The casters that I bought are probably a little more than I need. Each one can hold 250 pounds or so. But the wheels will have brakes, they will swivel. The brakes keep them from rolling and swiveling. One problem with the casters I bought is that the legs of this table, each leg is a single 2x4, which isn't wide enough to screw these plates onto. And that's what you need to hold the casters on. So my plan is to add 2x4 braces or supports to the legs, cutting these scrap boards into 3 or 4-inch sections. And so I will add 2 pieces to each leg. Now, the idea is, if this was one of the legs, looking at it from the bottom, you can see that the caster plate is too big to fit onto that single 2x4. It's too long this way. If you turn it the other way, it would only take 2 screws or 2 bolts. So if I add a 2x4 to the leg and add another one right beside it, it should be both wide enough and long enough to take the entire plate that holds the caster. That's my plan. I don't know if I can hold both of these and hold the caster at the same time, but I'm going to try. Well, I dropped a board. Sorry about that. The width should fit into 2 2x4s, and the existing leg would hold the other 2 bolts, oriented that way. So what I'm going to do now is cut these boards and then attach them to the bottom of the table. Okay, I have turned over my old table onto a blanket so the upper surface doesn't get scratched on the concrete floor. But now you can see exactly what I mean about the feet of the table being single 2x4s on all 4 corners. So the casters just won't fit. So the idea is, as I showed you earlier, but here you're getting a new perspective, is to cut these extra boards down to size so they'll be flush with the existing feet, putting 2 next to it. So you can see, as I was trying to show you earlier, that the 2 bolts will fit into the center of that board, and then the other 2 bolts, let me orient this a little better, the other 2 holes will fit into the 2 attached boards. So you can see if I tried to screw it in this way, the 2 bolts would be too close to the edge of the wood, and I just don't think they would hold. So anyway, let's get to cutting. I'm going to use the shorter table because the taller table is upside down right now. Okay, I am about ready to cut this first board down to size. The first thing I need to do is check how deep the blade is sitting on this skill saw. I haven't adjusted this in quite some time. I'm going to eyeball it here. As you can see, I am wearing eye protection and ear protection. It looks like the blade is deep enough. So I'm going to lock that plate depth in, and that clamp is in the way. So let me move that clamp so that the plate on the bottom of the skill saw will be able to slide across the board. I'm going to add it down over here so that I will have more than one clamp holding the board. And this is the first time I think I have ever recorded myself sawing. So hopefully I'm doing this right and it doesn't look too embarrassing. I'm not a professional woodworker or lumber person. I do like that safety guard swings back into place, covering the edge, most of the edge of the blade whenever I pull it away from the board. It does get a little frustrating when I start to push into the board, because it also has to push that guard out of the way. I wish there was a better way to handle that. Alright, this time I'm only going to have room to put one clamp on the board, but I'm going to do my best. Whoops, sorry about that butt shot. Oh, there's a little piece sticking off the edge there. I'm going to have to file that down later. These don't have to be exact. They just have to support the bolt on the end of the at the end of the caster. All right, yeah, I'm going to have to support this with my hand since that one clamp is not going to be enough. You see what I mean about the safety guard getting pushed out of the way as I push the saw across the edge of the board. This time I'm going to have to hold the whole board with my hand. Yep, and that's going to be tough, but we're going to do it. By the end of this, my hand is going to be pretty sore from pulling back against the pressure of my other hand pressing the saw forward. Also looks like I'm having trouble pushing the saw through the board at this point. And the sound of that was just blowing out the microphone on my cell phone. Hopefully you can still hear me talking over the roar of that saw, which is pretty loud. Okay, I have 4 blocks now, and then I have the 2 short boards that I'm going to cut in half. And again, the idea is just to get enough blocks to attach to the legs of the other table. Yeah, I don't need that clamp there anymore. I'll just get it out of the way. But you saw how easy that clamp was to slide into the track on the top of that table. Just wish there was a better way to hold the board here with the clamp. By the way, I do enjoy the smell of the freshly cut wood as I'm going through it. There's just something about that sawdust smell that I guess reminds me a little bit of my childhood, cutting firewood and helping my dad build things around the property. But the noise, I sure don't like the noise. Fortunately, these ear protection muffs that I have here are pretty good. All right, last board. Let's get this one cut. Now on this one, I began to notice that about halfway through, the saw blade just wasn't pushing through like I normally expect it to. And you can see I'm having trouble holding the board in place. I don't know if my blade was getting dull or if this wood was a little tougher than the other pieces, but I thought I was smelling smoke at this point, and I think you can see here in the video that there's more than sawdust coming out of here. I'm actually burning the wood as I got here close to the end of it and had to keep pulling and pushing on that blade to get it to finish. So I am going to go ahead and get a new blade to replace this one, which, by the way, is the blade that came with the saw. All right, let's pick those up and get ready to move on to the next step. Okay, now what I need to do is check to see that the edges of the boards are smooth enough. The only thing that I'm going to care about is that they're relatively flat and square, because it just needs to match up with the bottom of the legs of the table resting against the caster. I'm just going to check with my square to make sure that they're square. If the square side has a chip, then I will have to knock those off. But I don't need them to be smooth or sanded. Again, they're just going to be at the bottom of the table helping support the casters. So let me grab my square And I'm just going to line this up by hand and kind of eyeball it. That does appear to be square, but that's the end with this thing sticking out, a spike. This side doesn't have any, but it also appears to be square. So I'm going to use that as the bottom. This one actually has a factory edge. It's cut off from something I built earlier. So it should be square, and it is. All right, so I have two now. Let's check another one. There is no factory edge on this one. Both edges are cut. That seems square, or square enough for me anyway. Oh, and the lengths of these don't matter. You can see they're slightly different lengths. This is a factory edge here, looks like. Yeah, it does match. What I'm saying about the length, it doesn't matter because only the bottom end has to be flush. Here you can see where it looked like I burned on that one end. That is not square, is it? Let's line that side up. Oh, yep, it works. Make sure this side is lined up. That is not square. Let's flip it over. That one's close enough, but I'll have to knock off that pointy edge with a file or chisel or something. I don't even know if I know where my chisel is. That looks like a factory edge. Yeah, that one's fine. This might be a factory edge, but nope, it's not square. Let's try the other one. Let's get another chip on the edge. It's close enough. I'm just going to have to knock that chip off. Here, as I said I would, I'm going to chisel off these, or file off these extra spikes sticking out of the edges of these two boards. I couldn't find my chisel, but I didn't look very hard. But the file did a fine job of smoothing off the corners. I realized about halfway through that it probably didn't matter as long as the middle of them would sit flush and hold the bolts for the caster. It didn't matter that there was something sticking out of a far corner someplace. But I went ahead and did it since I had gone through the trouble of getting my file out. Okay, we've moved back over to the table that I'm working on. As I said a couple of times earlier, the idea is to attach them so that I'll have enough space to attach the caster, and I want them as flush as possible. So right now I'm brainstorming about how to do this because I've never done a project quite like this before. But what I think I want to do is put long 2.5 or 3-inch screws through the outside edge of the existing leg. And I want them to be far enough from the end so that they won't interfere with the bolts that are holding the casters in, which come down about 2 inches. So, and now I'm considering screwing those two together first. Whether or not I should put glue on them and then screw them. And should I drill pilot holes for any of these to make sure that I match up just right? I'm going to go grab some clamps so I can hold these up there and see how this is going to work. Again, I'm not a woodworker. I'm just kind of figuring this out as I go. I have a few more tools than I did when I built this table. But right here, kind of wishing I had a third or maybe even fourth hand to hold that up there. And now I'm trying to lift the end of the clamp with my leg while I hold the other end with my hand. And this is not going to work because the board slid down just a little bit. Let me see if I can wiggle it into place while I get the clamp set. It's pretty flush. Now let's work the other one in there. That corner is still sticking up just a little bit, but I think it's going to work out, be flat enough to hold the plate of the caster. Yeah. So now the idea is to put another clamp on there. Wait, that clamp is wide enough, I think, to hold all the boards. Oh, no. The board slipped when I let the clamp go. This part was pretty frustrating, but I did know that I wanted to get it right because I don't want to have to turn this table over again in a couple of months and redo all these casters. So I'm going to see if this sits here. It looks like there's plenty of room to drill the holes for the bolts, but it's not sitting quite even. Yeah, it's wobbling because one of the boards needs to be... I'm going to turn that because the ridge is in the middle of my big block. And maybe this will work out a little bit better. But again, I'm going to have to... maybe I should have cut those to length so that they would sit there on their own. Now that I think about it. Is this going to sit flat now? Oh, right. That's going to work. But wait, I'm going to have to take the clamp off again to do the gluing and screwing. Or maybe if I put the screws in first on the side. We'll see. Okay, I'm ready to drill some pilot holes. So I think I'm also going to glue them. I'm going to use these deck screws. That should be long enough. Let me set this drill down. It should go about halfway through those back boards. I'm going to drill a pilot hole here, which should go right through the center of each board. I didn't realize it as I was doing this, that this bit was too short, but I am going low enough to not interfere with the bolts from the casters. Surely these pilot holes helped, at least on this front board, to prevent splitting, because they are old 2x4s that I've had laying around for some time. But again, this drill bit is just too short, and it didn't even make a mark on the rear boards, which I didn't realize until much later. But I did get them straight and level. Here, the chuck, I guess is what you call it, of the drill started rubbing against the bottom of the table there. So I tried to adjust the angle just a little bit, but I'm going to have to get some longer drill bits when I do this in the future. And yeah, I don't know if here I was trying to think whether or not I had enough clamps to hold all the boards at once. So I'm going to go around and gather up the clamps and clamp them all together. Okay, I got all the boards clamped up and I drilled pilot holes through all of the sides. I don't know that it's necessary to add glue, but I think the screws will hold, but I want the glue as an extra measure. First, I'm going to make sure that the pilot holes went all the way through. And here is where I discovered that one pilot hole barely made a dent, and the other pilot hole did not touch the backwood at all. So here I became a little frustrated, thinking about re-drilling it, reclamping it. But it's also starting to sink in that the problem was my drill bit just wasn't long enough to make a hole in the rear board. So now I don't know where they were lined up exactly. I thought that the pilot hole was going to help me reline them up. But I did decide to put screws through the sides, but those pilot holes just barely made a dent on the back board. So I kind of wasted my time drilling the pilot holes in the first place, other than the countersink parts, which was the first time I used my countersink bit. I didn't even know that those existed until recently. I had always just been using a slightly larger drill bit to do a countersink spot. So, also, I'm not very familiar with gluing wood together. I just followed the instructions. It said to just squeeze some glue out on there and press them together. So I just squirted some glue around there and put them together, and then hoped that I could get the screw through the side and get them lined up. I probably should have made sure that the top was flush before I started this, huh? I should have clamped them before I started this drilling process. Am I going to figure that out? Yeah, I'm figuring that out. That I need to get it level again before I put the side screw through. Pardon the back of my head getting in the way. Yeah, I need to get that flush again with the clamp before I can start drilling that side hole. Yeah, I don't care about the glue squeezing out onto the bottom of the table because it's just going to be out of sight and therefore out of mind. But here, I'm trying to get them flush and exact, and I am aware that the glue is starting to set already. All right, that's pretty flush. Should be enough to hold the caster's level. And at this point, I am starting to realize I probably should have prepped a little bit more for a job of this size. And I also am realizing now watching this that I should have put maybe another clamp or two on there. But the boards separated a little bit when I put the screw through, which was a little frustrating, which means the glue's not going to do its job. So I decided to try to help that with this clamp, which I should have put on before I put the screw in. Hopefully one of these days, I'll know a little bit more about what I'm doing, and maybe we'll rebuild this table with all of this in mind, that I want a thicker surface on the top, that I'm going to want casters on the bottom. And so maybe I would use 4x4 posts for the corners, or have braces built in from the beginning, something like that. Let's see if this caster fits on here. It looks like it's going to be flat enough, and now I've got to let that set. Yep, now I need to put the screws in the end. I only have the one drill, so I'm constantly having to change out from the drill bit to the driver bits. But I think it doesn't make sense to buy another drill for as little woodworking as I do. And that separated them a little bit too. But yeah, at this point I'm realizing I should have more clamps. I did hear recently that you can never have enough woodworkers telling you that you can never have enough clamps. Yeah, and that twisted the boards as I put that screw in, so I'm going to have to reset it. Apparently my clamp wasn't strong enough. These are the yellow clamps that came with the Keter table. I'm going to have to move it to this side so I can screw the screw in the other side. Part of the problem here too is the size of the clamps and the size of my working area. Kind of climbing over myself as I do each part. Went to get a new clamp. I'm going to put this on the side of this to hold those in place. That's my hope. These red and black clamps, the Bessie clamps, I recently purchased right before I started this project. They were on sale at one of the big box stores. I don't remember which one. I go back and forth. Okay, let's put that other screw in, and then hopefully this will line up well enough that once everything is set, it'll take the caster on the bottom, which is the whole idea. That one went in a little better. Yeah, it's still moving. Yeah, thinking about putting another screw in a little higher up. I do have plenty of these screws, which don't cost that much. Because the whole idea is to get this very stable once the casters are on there and I turn this table over. I don't want it to be wobbling around. Although in hindsight, the bolts from the caster would probably hold the boards on. In fact, in hindsight, I'm wondering if I shouldn't have screwed the caster on first, and that would have leveled the boards for me. Then I could have put the side screws in. Yeah, that sounds a lot better in hindsight, doesn't it? You saw the boards move again there just as I put that in. But also realized later, I don't need the plate of the caster to be exactly square just because the caster wheels are round. But now I've got to go do the other three sides. Okay, I think all the screws are in. I put in a few extras just to be sure. I think if the glue doesn't hold because of the gaps, I think it's going to be okay. The next step is to drill the holes for these bolts that are going to hold on the casters. These are 1/4 inch bolts, about 2 inches long, with hex heads. Since the 1/4 inch bit is as wide as the threads, I'm going to go one drill bit size smaller and see if that works. First thing I need to do is mark, well, this clamp is in the way. I'm going to move that out of the way first, and then I'm going to grab a pencil to mark where I need the pilot holes to go for these bolts. I think that'll work. My pencil's over on this other table. All right. Now, the most important board is the one that's attached to the rest of the table. So I'm just going to check that these bolt holes will miss the screws that came in from the sides, and make sure that this most important board has the bolts centered in it. The other two are less important. They're mainly to hold the casters as stable as possible. But it's the board on the end that's going to support the weight. Just using a regular number 2 pencil to mark the holes in the center of the holes that are already in the plate. I'm going to grab a nail punch or center punch, whatever it's called, in order to get a spot for the drill bit to start. It's a trick I picked up recently. Almost all of these things that I'm doing here, I've just learned about from watching YouTube videos. But I did used to wonder why my drill bit would squirrel around and not get exactly in the center of the spot that I wanted. But this certainly helps. Also, I just found out within the last day or so about the auto punches. The spring-loaded ones. I'm going to try to get one of those before too long. Okay, it looks like they will all fit, so now I just need to drill those holes. I'm going to drill one hole first and make sure the bolt goes in, and then I'll drill at the other ones. Kind of like the idea of measure twice, cut once. I'm going to make sure this works before I go around drilling 16 holes. That feels too tight. I'm going to go to the next bit size up, knock the sawdust off of that, and switch out for a larger bit. I do need to get a hole guide. That's something else I just learned of recently, so I can match my screw sizes with my bits right before I drill instead of eyeballing them. That just went right in there, didn't it? Got too many clamps in the way, don't I? All right. Yeah, I think with a wrench that'll go in just fine. I'm going to go ahead and drill the other holes and get this caster put on there. I was checking to see how long the bolt was. I wanted to make sure I went deep enough, because these are not self-drilling screws. These are bolts. So all right, I think those are deep enough. Find a place to set this down. This is the problem with actually working on the table where I normally would set things. But now they're in the way because it's also the thing I'm working on. All right, I need to get one of these washers. I wasn't sure if I absolutely needed the washers, but I did get 1/4 inch washers just in case. The heads of the bolts were larger than the holes on the casters, but not a lot larger. So I just wanted to be sure. I would rather be safe than sorry. I just bought these ratcheting wrenches recently, and they're very short, but they were about half the price of the longer ones, which were priced ridiculously high. So I did not get the longer ones. Let me turn this over to get the right direction. And that keeps slipping off the bolt head. So I may try my socket. But I'm going to go ahead and get this down. It looks like it's working. And I'll go ahead and get the others started before I switch out for my socket set. Yeah, I found out that just the action of putting in that first bolt moved the plate a little bit so that the other holes weren't lined up as well as I had hoped. So here I put a little bit of pressure on the outside of the other hole to kind of widen it a little bit so the second bolt would be a little further out than originally intended. And then when I move on to the next plates, I will try to drive the center punch on the outsides. Okay, let's do this one more time. All right, let me grab another washer and another bolt here and get that started on the next hole. I'm using my finger to hold the wrench up so it doesn't slide off of that small bolt head. But it is handy to have a ratcheting wrench that you don't have to pick up every time. All right. This is taking too long, so I'm definitely thinking here about switching out for my socket set. Okay, I got all 4 casters attached to the bottom of the table. It turned out that the wrench just wasn't going to do the job, so I switched first to my socket set, and that did okay, but it only got them down so far, and then I remembered that I have some bits that fit in my drill that would fit exactly these hex heads, and so I used that to finish driving the bolts all the way down. Now I'm about to turn over this table and see if everything holds up. If it doesn't, there's probably going to be a big mess, and I'll tell you all about it. Okay, it turned over just fine. The casters are holding up the weight. They appear to be sturdy to hold this and move it around. When I put the brakes down, they don't go anywhere. I can do it with my hand, but you can also flip them up and down with the foot, and it locks in place. There is a little bit of a rattle, which bothers me, but I think I'll get over it. If I'm using power tools on top of the table, that kind of thing, but I don't know what can be done about it. The wobble is inside the swivel part, but it does roll easily and relatively quietly, and swivels nicely. So I was surprised at how quietly the rolling action is. But there's my new work table with the new top surface. And it's now 4.5 inches taller, so it's just over 40 inches high, which is about even with my waist. It's a very comfortable working height for someone who's 6 foot tall or taller, especially compared to the very short fold-out tables that you can buy at the big box stores. So thank you for sticking with me through this process, and that's all for now.